Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkisoon. Thanks again for staying with us. Is there a crisis in leadership in our country? David, before we went to the 7 o'clock newscast, you were making that point, and we're looking at, one, the manner in which things are being done, the learning institutions, the people who are coming up. Do you see young people saying that, I am going to call this politician to account for their actions? Because we are all the stakeholders in this company. Trinidad and Tobago belongs to us, the people of this country. Do you think that we are creating a society of leaders, or is it simply that we have allowed leadership to go to a level where it's all tied into office, status, and power?
Well, I do believe, first of all, that we definitely have potential among our young men to create effective leaders. I also believe, based on our socioeconomic condition generally, that there's a crisis in the evolution of young male leaders because there's an absence of positive male role models, and there's an overabundance of negative peer group influences. And these negative peer group influences are, along with a number of risk factors that young men find themselves in, would lead many of our young men astray in particular. And so juvenile delinquency is on the rise. You have conditions of broken homes, dysfunctional families, faulty parenting, as well as cultural deprivation, learning disorders, educational underachievement, which all compound the problem. And so there's a generation, not just a generation gap, but a generation gulf. I frequently ask the question, when last did an 80-year-old man have a conversation with an 80-year-old boy? Or when last did a 70-year-old man in the community counsel a 7-year-old boy? So there's a generation gulf. And so the absence of effective male role models whom a young person can emulate are missing, and therefore there are little leadership options for young males as opposed to the females, where I think our society is breeding a lot more female leaders, seeing that beginning in the home, it is the mother who is visible and present and effectively functioning within her role as a parent, as opposed to many of the men. And I think that will be detrimental in the long run. That will be very consequential in the long run for creating more male leaders. And so males are gravitating towards the gangs. It's
interesting that you bring the gender into it. We have a female Prime Minister, Dr. Mangal. Many expected more principle, morality, a softer approach to consultation, negotiation. Yet the word consultation is bandied around as a farce in this country. A female leader and the female leadership in this country, do you think that the country is any better off today than it was 10 years ago?
Well, I think the expectations of the female leader were definitely there. And to some extent, I would say that, yes, she has certainly given us a very different leadership. However, what is required is not just the leader's ability to craft that vision, but to communicate that vision and share it amongst the people she works with. So who are they on the ground taking us forward? Are they similarly inspired? Are they of similar mind? Are they going to do what is her vision? Are they going to help us to create the society that she has said we will create? If you recall, she did say we want to make things better. If I can say, perhaps quote unquote, she said, I want to see things work more efficiently. The buses must work. You know, you want to get to work, there's no traffic on the road and so on. Efficiency, effectiveness in the system. But it's the people on the ground. So what do you need to put in place to get that to happen is the question.
Have we become so wary of the leadership? We look at the competitive report that was released by the graduate school, and we're looking at not only the lack of trust in politicians, but the lack of trust in institutions. So we're taking the personalities out of it, but we're looking at the structures that exist. What does that say about the leadership in our country and the institutions put there to protect the people and the leaders, Yvonne?
And that's it, that the issue is, you know, when good people remain quiet, what happens? And that is why we have to have the kind of society that we have, that we can still have whistleblowers, people who can come forward. So that the Sunday Guardian ran an exclusive on Sunday about this, and because of the Sunday Guardian story, a whole chain of events were unleashed as a consequence of it. So that somebody exercise leadership. The media has a role to play in all of this, and it is important that they play that particular role. With regard to the question of the Prime Minister, I mean, bear in mind that the leadership skill that is required in her particular instance now is that she is leading a political grouping that came together in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, came together, challenging a political party that was 54 years old. And therefore, you're dealing with different dynamics. So that she's leading a group that was hastily put together, running a coalition, and therefore the leadership skill that is required to keep that together is different from, let us say, a situation where you had a political party where there was an open warfare. Prior to the 2010 general election, and now the party is trying to heal in the aftermath of the open warfare, having chased the former leader out of Balize House in the worst possible fashion. That party has to heal. So the leadership that is required from the leader of the PNM at this time is to heal the party, to try to get back to government. And the leadership that is required from the Prime Minister is how to hold a coalition that came together in 6 weeks and continue to govern the country with all of the lofty principles that they put forward, bearing in mind you have so many different points of view around the table.
Dr. Mangal, when we speak of leadership, you know, everyone has a different idea of what a leader is and what effective leadership is. Some can say the politicians are simply there to manage. Some can say that they are leaders. How will you define leadership in our country?
Well, I would say leadership is really the ability to, first of all, craft an appropriate vision. Secondly, communicate that vision in a very charismatic fashion so that people actually buy into it. You know, a 10-year vision, let's say, where will our society be? Where will we be? We have to answer that in very, very clear terms. And then the ability to support masses of people as they work towards that vision. So it's not just to say it, but to say it and to make sure we get there as well. That is the leadership, and it must always be based on moral positions and on very sound principles.
And when you say the moral position, I mean, I can say that my morals and my ethics are different to your morals and your ethics. Yes. And I sometimes wonder about a society. The things that I see bandied about in the media, I kind of wonder, if we were a first world nation, would this have been allowed to happen? Does it mean that we are a society lacking morals, or simply the leaders have absolutely no shame?
I think we're a society lacking some sort of cogency and clear understanding about what is right and what is wrong. You know, that is very important.
David?
But, you know, the scriptures teach, in the book of Proverbs it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And then the book of Luke teaches that when the blind lead the blind, both of them fall in the ditch. Now, we can offer metaphors to suggest that Trinidad and Tobago is not just perishing, but perishing in the ditch, which suggests that vision has been absent. And yesterday I noticed, I was looking at the British media, the Prime Minister of England, David Cameron, as well as the Chief of Police for South Yorkshire, both gave apologies. I mean, this is the Prime Minister in the Parliament, for an incident that took place 23 years ago, the Hillsborough incident with the Liverpool football team, where close to 100 fans were killed. Now, I mean, I've read about that a number of times over the years, and how the fans were blamed. New research has suggested that it was the police to be blamed. Now, the political maturity to go before an entire country and offer an apology and say, we were wrong, based on the official information that we gave to the state. I think that our, and I dare say our regional leadership, is yet to elevate to that degree of maturity to be able to recognize and admit that they had made errors and mistakes in the governance of the country and are willing to demonstrate the humility to correct that. I think we have a culture of cover-ups.
Culture of cover-ups, is it simply that we are politically immature?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, this Prime Minister has had a couple of occasions where she has actually gone to Parliament and apologized for mistakes that they've made. Rashmi Ramnarayan being one of the biggest blunders of this particular administration, and she's taken responsibility, apologized for it. This particular situation, again, it's another one, this Section 34. But we have to understand the political culture. You know, on the 10th of October, 1964, Dr. Eric Williams, in a public meeting, said that he was going to reinstate Dr. Patrick Solomon in the cabinet after he had resigned because there had been an expose about his involvement with the release of a relative from a police cell. This was very early in our independence, 2 years after we became independent, 10th of October 1964. And his attitude was, who did not like it could leave the country. So that is a context in which our independent nation was born. If you didn't like what the Prime Minister was going to do, you could leave the country. That was immortalized in song. Who don't like it could get to hell out of here. And therefore, we have to understand our nation was born with these attitudes to power. And this is why I was raising the issue of the post-plantation society, the way in which we have handled power. So we've come a long way from that to points now where prime ministers are apologizing for errors that they've made in government.
Okay, and then I would take the argument and flip it on the next side and say that I expect a government to run the country in a proper, effective manner. I do not expect every Monday morning there will be some debacle to clear up, some point when you have to apologize at some point. Like, I understand that, and initially I thought, great, a different style of leadership. Thank God for consultations, thank God for these things are happening. But then you become wary as a population. If you are losing your confidence in these systems because you see every Monday morning something happens, and you're right, if the story wasn't aired or wasn't published by Denise Wren on the Sunday Guardian, where would we have been? What exactly would have transpired now, today?
And you're absolutely right, and that is why we have elections, and that is why Trinidad and Tobago is a functioning democracy, having had 5 changes of government. Because ultimately, the people of this country are the ones who are going to exercise the ultimate verdict. We don't have an opportunity in between. If the government is continually going to be apologizing and apologizing and apologizing, then clearly there's a level of ineptness that is being manifested. So it's all well and good to adopt the moral stance that you will apologize, but if there are so many repeated apologies on and on, then obviously we're talking about something else. We're talking about being inept.
Skills and competency. Do our leaders possess them? Are they the reason that we are losing trust in the institutions?
I think there's a lot of room for improvement with respect to skills and competencies of leadership, which are really quite different from those that you can acquire from a book. You know, the ability to self-reflect and to think about the bigger picture, to think creatively and innovatively. Those things we have to mold and grow amongst our populace. So even while there is an apology, if we know that there is something wrong, an apology is an acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is simply not enough. After the acknowledgement must come some sort of transparency with respect to what went wrong and a commitment to renew.
Commitment to renew, transparency, and fixing it. And now we've reached the interesting part, David. You're on the ground. Are they fixing it?
Well, no.
In a short answer.
But Dr. Ghani said something very interesting, and it brings me back. I think there's been a culture of the abuse of power in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, historically, in the early 1880s, we had the Canberley riots. 1884, we had the Pusey riots. 1903, they burnt the Red House, the water riots. 1919, there were the waterfront riots. 1937, the oil field riots. Then 1970, Black Power Revolution. 1990, Muslimin coup. Now, many people around 2010 were beginning to theorize that, well, every 20 years in Trinidad and Tobago, there is some kind of social reaction.
But I sometimes think we're a docile population. I sometimes think that we don't fight for anything. But look at the history.
That's a lot of revolutions.
True.
And I think right now what's happening, and as a matter of fact, I think ever since 1990, governments have been wary that the population is on the edge. And there have been a number of occasions, if we check back, probably at least 6 or 7 of them, moments where governments were on the edge with some kind of expectation that something might happen. And I think there's been almost a management of the tolerance of the general public just below the point of where there'll be another social movement explosion. And I think the government constantly, diligently monitors and scrutinizes the sentiments of the people just to not take it past that boiling point. But leadership has been abusive in the authority that they've been entrusted with, and I think they're mindful of that. And so there's like a measurement scale to see exactly how angry the masses are. And so I think that is very carefully managed.
Managing not only expectations, which is a few minutes till we wrap this interview. Dr. Ghani, crisis in leadership, the institutions, the Arthur Lockjaw Graduate School of Business, that report highlighted lack of trust in politicians, lack of trust in the institutions, a general, very skeptical population. How do we move forward from here?
Well, I think a lot of the skepticism has come from the fact that there is a lot of talk that goes on about people being corrupt and all kinds of things happening, but the strike rate on conviction is very poor. And therefore, the old talk level is very high, and the conviction level is very low. And that gap, there's a huge gap there, and that, I think, promotes the cynicism in the society that you're talking about, because people don't have confidence.